Today's guest helps leaders solve one of the most pressing challenges in modern work: how to perform at a high level without burning out the very people responsible for the results. Paula Davis is a globally recognized advisor and leadership strategist on burnout prevention, workplace stress, and team resilience. She's the founder of the Stress and Resilience Institute, where for more than 15 years, she's helped leaders implement what she calls TNTs, tiny noticeable things, which I love, by the way, that create stronger teams and more sustainable performance. Paula's path to this work is compelling. She began her career as a lawyer, which doesn't happen every day, I think, left practice after 7 years and earned a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. She went on to serve on the Penn faculty that trained resilient skills to more than 40,000 soldiers, that's a big number, and their families as part of the Army's comprehensive soldier and family fitness program. This work has been tested in environments where pressure is, in fact, real. She's the author of Beating Burnout at Work and her newest book, Lead Well: 5 Mindsets to Engage, Retain, and Inspire Your Team. Both have been selected as must-reads by the Next Big Idea Club, which is curated by Adam Grant, Susan Cain, Malcolm Gladwell, and Daniel Pink. You probably have heard those names. And Lead Well was named one of the top 11 leadership books for 2025. Wow, I'm impressed. Paula, thanks so much and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Clint. I'm so excited to chat with you.
So I like to kick this off with the same question to everybody. I like to think that everybody that comes on my podcast is a superhero, and all superheroes have an origin or a backstory. So what is yours? I hear that it involves a hog barn, just somewhere in there.
Oh, we're going way back. We're going to go. I was going to start with the law practice, but no, we'll go way back. No, I come from a very much an entrepreneurial family, and it's not just my my nuclear family, my parents and my brother. We've all started businesses. My parents, as I mentioned in the beginning of the book, started a business in the early 1980s that was a plastic injection molding company, and it started as my dad's side hustle, and he ended up growing it into a 3-shift. I think. At the peak, he had 40 plus employees, and then they sold the business successfully in the late 1990s. But that entrepreneurial way of being was just how I grew up. And so leading businesses, being in businesses, figuring out how businesses run, just kind of having my hands in all of that has always been something that's been really appealing to me. So then it would make total sense that I would, go to law school. But I actually went to law school thinking that I would be more of a corporate attorney helping small business owners, actually. And it just, didn't turn out that way in the early stages and ended up going into commercial real estate. But yeah, no, the small business owner sort of mentality is really just where my roots start.
And then what jumped you to Penn?
So I actually burned out during what became the last year of my law practice. So all these threads are tying through now. So I had been practicing for about 6 years, and I started to notice that like my own stress response was off. The quantity and volume of work that I had, because I had switched from a law firm role to in-house counsel. So I was actually in a large organization that was growing very, very quickly. Taking on that new role was really everything that came with it, and sort of shifting from those legal environments really brought a lot of stress, I think, in a way that I misunderstood or certainly misjudged. And so I didn't have a language to really talk about what I was experiencing or feeling, and I just knew something was off. I tried to just kind of put my head down and kind of work through it, and that didn't work. And then over time, my symptoms started to get worse. So ultimately, and this is over a year-long period of trying to figure out what was going on, figure out, do I want to stay in the law? Do I want to stay at the organization that I was in? Talking to a coach. Ended up getting panic attacks almost every day. So, a ton of anxiety and other things were happening. The coach who I ended up hiring just to kind of try and figure out like next steps career wise had just finished the applied positive psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. And so she said that, and I was like, what is that? Like, what is that program? Because my undergrad is in psychology. And I've always loved that area of science. And so she explained it to me, and I went, oh my gosh, I have to check this thing out, and I've got to figure this out. And it was a very, very new program. And so really once I heard about that path, I never really turned back. And so applied to the program, got in, stopped my law practice in June of 2009 and started my master's degree in September of 2009. So I decided to make my mess my message. I wanted to go back and get some additional education so I could go back into initially what I thought the legal profession, but that's expanded to really help people who are feeling a lot of stress and pressure not end up the way that I did.
So it kind of makes sense coming out of that burnout you were experiencing, that your first book would predominantly be about that.
Yep.
So what led you to write the new one, Lead Well?
Yeah. So the first book came out in 2021 and, obviously in the middle of the pandemic and, all of the things that were going on back in 2021. And for the arc of my career, but especially since the first book came out, I really have spent a concentrated amount of time with a lot of leaders and a lot of teams, just talking about, what are they seeing as giving rise to burnout within their teams? How are they able to feel like they can lead during complex and uncertain times and all of that? And I realized the more groups that I talked to and the more leaders that I spent time with, they were really kind of frustrated and puzzled. I think they were starting to feel a lot of burnout themselves, but they were also, kind of stuck thinking like, how do I help my team through this? How do I help my team navigate this extraordinary complexity? As the pandemic eased and we started to come out of it, a lot of people were still really changed by what they experienced during that time period. And so a lot of things were happening. And I realized that leaders didn't really have a playbook. They didn't really have a language or vocabulary or a starting point or easy tools to not only help themselves, but also really help their teams be able to, kind of go through this process, go through the way that work was evolving in a healthy way, in a resilient way, and in a sustainable way.
So you mentioned, we barely touched on it in the first part about where you kind of grew up and your dad had his business, and I was referencing the hog barn, which I think is where he started, even though he ended up with a real facility with 3 shifts a day, et cetera. But he had this idea about extreme client service, and that really resonated with me because I tend to be like that with clients as well. And I'm just curious, what is that and how that really kind of influenced where you headed?
Yeah. So for him, and I always remember these different like stories and instances. Like it wasn't just about him being able to deliver. So he created plastic injected molded parts for different organizations and for different groups. So I remember him saying like, such and such company their line is going to shut down if they don't get a certain quantity of parts by X day, right? So he would go into the shop, he would open it up, even if it was just himself, he would start the machines, he would, do all of the process, he would create however many boxes or whatever count of parts were needed, and he would literally drive them to the, wherever the organization was, to make sure that their line didn't go down. So, it was always this service mentality. This is, this, how can we help? I remember there were times where he was low material and there were new sales folks who were working at the material resin companies who would drive the, 2 bags when he was still small organization, out to him so that he could continue to produce. And so it was just very much this lovely ecosystem that I witnessed that was just this constant kind of service mentality. What is it that I can do and that we can provide to make sure that you, my client, are getting the best outcome possible?
And I think later in the book, there's somebody, I can't remember the name, but you talked to somebody and he was saying that there are certain clients you still need to have that high touch point with, but there's other times you have to step back and say, I'm at my daughter's recital or I'm at a graduation and I'm just not going to take the call, right? So there's a balance.
And I think that's really important because, working with a lot of the organizations that I do and in the industries that I do, this notion of great client service can sometimes be taken to, unsustainable points and regions. But yeah, that's one of my favorite stories. I was a partner at a large law firm who I interviewed, and he was, I think, really drove the point home of talking about, when I'm working with clients and we're working on sophisticated matters, I always like to make sure that they obviously know that I'm a point of contact or the point of contact, but they also know other members of my team because they need to see that there's this collective who is working to help them. And while you may, call me first, I may hand you off to another person on my team. And it's also providing, valuable learning opportunities for the person who is, on the receiving end of that call. So yes, you're right. There does have to be a balance for sure.
I think the other thing that was surprising when I read that was you actually told the story of somebody, or maybe it was him telling a story, but it's basically where he was working late at night and this person sent an email saying this has been done. And he pointed out that you may have interrupted this person and then maybe unlike you, they shut their mind off at 5 o'clock about work or doing something in their family, and you've interrupted them, and that's not a good thing. So I never thought about that. It was interesting.
I had never thought about it either, especially coming out of, 7 years of law practice where there is just such a, extreme focus on, this client service and what have you. And it is always, and it's really, I think, for high achievers, I think it is sort of a badge of honor when you can say, you see yourself sending emails at like midnight or 1 a.m, or you're responding to the boss, at all hours and things like that. But it was the first time when he said that I really paused as well and went, whoa, yeah, I guess I wouldn't necessarily, unless there was some crisis happening or, I was specifically instructed to, communicate at that particular point in time, that might be an interruption that wouldn't be looked on favorably. And so, yeah, that stuck with me too.
Yeah. I have somebody working with right now who I love her emails. At the bottom, it says, "This was sent when it was convenient for me. Please respond when it's convenient for you," which is, it's kind of band-aiding what we just talked about.
Yeah. No, that's great.
So you argue that burnout isn't just an individual struggle, but it's really a systemic culture influence problem. And why do leaders need to shift from a me focus to a we focus when it comes to well-being?
Yeah, I think so I've been in this conversation long enough. So I've seen how this has really kind of played out and where it has stalled. So that's really kind of the first entry point, but really starting to understand and think about burnout in a systemic way, meaning that there's work design pieces that promote burnout, and then there's the individual stuff. And I think what has happened as organizations have jumped into the well-being conversation, or some of these, whatever word you want to kind of put to it, we tend to still see burnout, or have thought about burnout historically, as an individual failing of stress management. You're just not doing it the right way, or you're just not, recovering the right way, or you just don't have, the right stress management strategies, or what have you. And we keep trying to send the message, well-being strategies and wellness programs and things like that are good, they're valuable, and they're well-intentioned. They're just not necessarily the right set of strategies to fix something that, when you start to really understand and unwind kind of the upstream causes of it, they're not going to help fix things like unmanageable workloads and lack of recognition and not having enough flexibility and control and values misalignment, and the things that we know that really cause burnout. The things that really cause burnout are more of those structural, cultural work design pieces. And so a lot of my work has been trying to get leaders to see it's not that we're going to get rid of the individual conversation and the strategies and the things like that. They need those things, and that's really helpful, but we're not really going to advance the conversation until we also start looking at a lot of those upstream drivers and causes. And so it's a both and conversation, instead of, oftentimes what I hear is, individuals saying, there's nothing I can do because it's the work culture, and leaders saying, I have so much on my plate. What do you want me to do now? And, kind of each person pointing the finger at the other one, and nothing happens. So really seeing it as a collective, understanding that, there's team dynamics, leadership behaviors, and individual behaviors that all intertwine, and we have to address all of that if we're going to move forward.
I love the studies that you referenced in the book. And the first one that comes to mind was the Deloitte 2023 Workplace Wellbeing Report, where more than 75% of executives think the well-being improved, while 66% of the employees say it stayed the same or got worse. So how can team leaders bridge this gap?
It's so funny because as I continue to review research, and it marches on in different ways. There's still these same types of gaps that exist, where I feel like the most senior leaders perceive things happening that really the, frontline, managers and other folks just are seeing a completely different story. And I think that, it becomes, and why it's important for me to make sure that I'm in front of as senior level groups as possible so that they really understand the disconnect and, hopefully can promote some conversations within the organizations as well, because those gaps exist in a number of different ways and we have to figure out how to close them because we're not solving for anything when those types of gaps exist.
And you might think, how can you look at the same data of two different people and see different things? But if you have confirmation bias, then if you think everything's going well, you might see 5 pieces of data and pick the one that reinforces what you were thinking and ignore the other 4. So it's probably not surprising.
Well, no, and if you think things are going well for you, you think they're going well for everyone, or you're more likely to see like, oh, well, I'm fine and I'm managing my stress and all is good. And, so teams must be doing great. We're doing great things around here. And you're exactly right. So both of those pieces.
Another study showed that managers and spouses, by the way, have the greatest impact on people's mental health. But only about 40% of the managers feel capable of helping a company achieve its well-being goals, which seems like a big problem.
It is a big problem. So when you look at the research, it is extraordinarily clear how important leaders are to this conversation, to the motivation, to the psychological safety, to the well-being, to the burnout prevention. I mean, leaders are just so critical to this conversation, but they oftentimes aren't given the training, the education, the support, the resources to actually be able to do something. So a lot of them really want to do right by their teams. They just have no clue where to start. I mean, I think regardless of, industry or profession, whether you got an MBA, your law degree, you're a healthcare professional, or what have you, you don't get a lot of leadership training necessarily in your academic, area of study. But then you also certainly don't get the layer of psychology and, the underpinning of, human strategies and behavior and other things to really help you see like, what should I do here and where should I start, right? It's about strategy and making our numbers and quarterly profits and, all of the economic side. But there's a whole human side that needs to be developed. And we just oftentimes just don't have any sort of reference or framing or starting point.
Now, one of the things you said, though, was that one of the more effective ways to boost engagement is to have meaningful conversations with their team, and which I loved, of course, because this podcast is called The Conversation. Mm-hmm. And what makes a conversation meaningful? I'm assuming the meaningful is purposeful.
Yeah, it's talking about strengths, right? It's sitting down with someone and really understanding the impact that they're having on the team and within their corner of the world of work, and actually communicating that to them, and really having somebody be able to clearly walk away understanding what I did on this particular project led to this particular outcome, or our team is better off because I did A, B, and C, or what have you, and having that really be understood becomes critical. And then layering on, conversations about strengths, managers and leaders really being able to say, your curiosity here really, helped you ask the right question in this last project meeting, and that opened the door to a completely different way of us perceiving how we needed to, move forward, for example. And so it's the repetition, and I don't necessarily always call them meaningful conversations. I'll call them one-on-one conversations. Leaders with whom I've worked call them well-being check-ins, like lots of different names and phrases, but it's having these regular, and they don't have to be for a long period of time, 15, 20 minutes every other week or so, check-ins where you're delivering some of that feedback, where you're having, a back and forth conversation that maybe isn't necessarily related to something always work related, right? So I'm trying to get to know you and, kind of deepen that sense of trust. And so, so many people miss those opportunities, and we just think like, we've got our yearly review or we've got our quarterly, whatever. And we've got to make sure that we're adding in more of those moments of connection and meaning in a one-on-one way.
I think in today's environment where it is more about whether it's billable hours or just getting more done. People are so busy, and I work in project management, and I can make the argument that many companies overlaunch and this wish and a prayer that we'll get it all done. And if I just push people hard enough, it'll happen. But so then what the side effect of that is that people are so busy. If I see you in the hallway, I really hope you don't ask me any questions, because I got other things. I'm trying to get to this meeting, and the last thing I want to do is have a conversation and talk about personal things. But in reality, if I can't convert you from an email address to which I don't feel a connection to a human being that is on the same team with me, we're going to struggle as a team.
We're going to hugely struggle as a team. And, when we go back to thinking about those upstream drivers or causes of burnout, the biggest one that I have seen by far and away across industry, certainly over the last 5, 6, 7 years, is having an unmanageable workload. It's not high workload. So high workload is good. High workload is stressful, but it operates on our system in a little bit of a different way. It's unmanageable, right? I am like drinking from a fire hose constantly. I'm trying to get my arms around everything. I'm treading water, and at any moment I feel like I might sink. It's that kind of feeling. And when we are in that, and we have far too many meetings in our world of work, and it's, that could be a whole conversation in and of itself, but it's kind of a subgroup or a subcategory or a factor in the unmanageable workload conversation. And so when you think about, if I am drinking from the fire hose kind of level busy, it's going to be harder for me to foster a good, solid community, a cohesive community within the team. It's going to be harder for me to notice moments when people are doing a really great job and to say the thank yous and the things and the recognition and appreciation and other things that we have to do. So the factors that drive burnout all are kind of interconnected and feed, off each other. And it's oftentimes driven by that sense of unmanageable workload. Not always, but it's a huge factor.
And there's almost a hidden thing there as well, in that if I'm working 60, 80 hours a week, and you're only doing 60, why are you talking to me? I'm working more than you. So, come back to me when you actually put some effort in, is almost the feeling. And that's probably not going to foster goodwill either.
No. And I also see, a different angle to that. Oftentimes leaders will tell me, they're like, we're underwater as a team, and we just have like way too much work for a variety of different reasons. And leaders oftentimes will try and take that extra work off of team members' plates and put it on theirs. And so now they're already probably overloaded, and they're adding even more overload to the overload. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing, leaders generally as a cohort experiencing elevated and higher rates of burnout as well.
So there was a matrix in the book kind of talking about this a little bit. It was called People Plus Performance, which I really loved. And can you expand on what that was? Because there's also a business case. If somebody says, well, that's work, but there was a huge business case to be made if we were able to pull this off.
Yeah, it's so funny because I hear that oftentimes when I'm delving into the, how do you motivate teams, the psychological safety, some of these concepts which, do require leaders. It doesn't have to be hard things, but you got to do something, right? Leadership is a verb. And I will get a lot of pushback. And I think it's oftentimes stemming from the exhaustion piece of the overload of work part. Be like, like you're telling me I have to do something additional. So what I'm already trying to do. And it's like, yes, you're a leader, right? It's a set of behaviors. You have to actively do things. But I loved coming across this quadrant and this particular piece of research, because the research categorized organizations that were studied into performance focused. So these companies outperformed in the financial results dimension. They had a separate category for people-focused. So those were the companies who outperformed on the human capital dimensions of work. They had the typical performers, which was the vast majority of the companies that they looked at, that showed no distinct patterns or didn't stand out in either of those dimensions. And then they had about 9% of companies were companies that they called people and performance focused, where they really excelled on both sides of the equation, the financial metrics and the people side. And 9%, not a lot of organizations, right? The typical performers were 55% of the group. So most companies are not falling in that category where they're excelling on both sides. Yeah, and the business case that came from it, what they noticed, in terms of the decade leading up to the pandemic, what they noticed in the years following the pandemic in terms of profits and revenue and a whole host of metrics that those blended people and performance focused companies just blew every other type on that quadrant really out of the water. And I think it's interesting, and I put it in the book because when I talk about this, sometimes I will get pushback, especially from the organizations that are excelling on the financial side of the equation. It's like, what do you want us to do, right? We got a lot of money coming in. People are happy. They're getting paid well. Really, what's the problem? And the study made a point of saying that what is oftentimes missed by those folks is that when you do hit a rough patch, you do hit something goes wrong or there's an issue within the organization, oftentimes when you don't have that people side also elevated, you tend to have a bumpier ride throughout those hurdles and issues and complexities and setbacks. And so I just think with the way the world is operating right now in terms of how complex it is and how uncertain it is, you really have to start to pay attention to that people side as well in order to navigate the landscape right now. But yeah, it's a fascinating study. I try and include it whenever I can when I'm trying to make the case about, the business case associated with these things.
That's important because people see the ROI and that's what they want to talk about. And you have to say, yeah, it's a cost, but there's a huge benefit that more than outweighs the cost. So
yeah.
You mentioned, I like the number 6 apparently, because you have 6 a couple places in the book. And the one was the core 6 drivers of chronic stress and disengagement that teams need to watch out for. What are those, or if there's more than, if there's like 1 or 2 that are most important, what are they?
Yeah. So the first one I've mentioned is the unmanageable workload. So that's a big one. The second one is lack of recognition. So all of these categories have a lot of like nuance and subcategories associated with them. So lack of recognition isn't just, I don't hear thank you a lot. That's part of it. But it's that I also fail to see the positive impact that my work is having within the organization or on the team. I hear from people that they will say, man, I feel like I'm working at a certain level, but my title just doesn't match. I don't feel like I'm getting invited to the important calls or pitches or meetings or projects that are really visible within the organization. So all of that is lack of recognition. Unfairness is the third one, which is perceived favoritism. So it's not what I do, it's who you know. That's how I get, promoted around here. That's, how people, start to make their names and careers around here. It's lack of transparency. A lot of closed door meetings. There seem to be whispers among different groups and no one's saying anything about like what's really happening or how it's going to impact my work. And I think that's starting to increase with the AI component of work, right? Because I think there's a lot of whispers and closed door meetings happening in a lot of organizations right now about, is AI going to displace people? What percentage of people is it going to displace? Should we say something now? Maybe we don't know yet. So I think that's a big one. Lack of community is number 4. So I don't feel like I'm part of a supportive team. I don't have a lot of, workplace friendships. I don't feel like my leader has my back. Values misalignment is a 5th one, and that's one that I'm hearing with more frequency. So I value and want certain things about work and from my work, and my organization's values are different from my values. And so that mismatch can be stressful over time. And then the last one is lack of autonomy. So that lack of perceived flexibility and control. And it's not necessarily just in terms of where or when I work, but it is, how my social networks expand. Do I have a lot of decision latitude in my work? Do I have creativity in terms of how I can approach what I'm working on? So all of those things go into flexibility and control. So those are the core 6. Those are the big 6 drivers. I would say I have gotten to the point where I ask most groups if they have a 7th or an 8th, or would they add anything to the list? And the thing that I'm hearing most commonly is uncertainty. So almost adding like a little asterisk number 7, uncertainty as another potential driver.
You mentioned a couple times so far unmanageable workload, and I'm wondering, how do you distinguish between that and high workload? What's really the difference?
Yeah, so high workload, you got a lot that you're working on, you have a lot on your plate, but you perceive that you have the right resources or enough resources to manage that, meaning I've got a supportive leader. I have really great teammates and colleagues who I know I can rely on. We have really good procedures and processes and systems in place. I can find the information that I need quickly. There's a whole host of different types of things that can help with that. And so it's stressful, but it's the type of stress that's called a challenge demand, meaning that, I got a lot of work. It makes me feel like I'm kind of wanted around here and I'm doing a good job. And, there's motivational aspects to that. Unmanageable workload is, as I described, where you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. You've got stuff coming at you. I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing. What should I do first? I'm trying to get my arms around it. I feel like I'm treading water and at any moment I might sink. That almost panicked feeling of the fact that I can never get ahead, I can never get it all done, is what's called a hindrance demand, meaning that I don't really derive a lot of benefit from being in this state. And it's sending me in a different path when it comes to my stress.
It makes sense to me. I was on a project for about 4 years at a client, and team was great. I loved the people. I loved working on it, but there was so much that I would have to swim as hard as I could just to barely keep up. And if I ever said, let me just take a breath, then I was behind again. I have to swim even harder to catch back up. It's just, I don't think I ever did catch up.
No, and I don't think a lot of people did. I mean, you have to, this was the unmanageable, the workload sustainability chapter in the book was one of the hardest chapters I've ever written about anything, in part because as I dug into it more, there was just more and more and more. And it's this huge sort of layered big ball of stuff that takes a lot of time. And I can see how in organizations of all sizes, no one really wants to take the time to sift through and go like, why did we open this project 5 years ago? Why is it still open? Why can't we have enough resources at this? Are we really putting a Band-Aid on this particular, initiative because it's not really solving any sort of true problem? I don't know. Let's just let it go. I mean, there's all of these decisions and non-decisions happen over the course of many, many years to a point where you get into this very thick weeds. I get you're kind of like in the weeds, and at some point somebody or a group of people at a certain level just has to be able to start to kind of sift through that and unwind it. And it's just a really, really hard thing to do.
Yeah. Let's talk about the ABCs for a minute. So you have autonomy, belonging, and challenge, and you describe them as essential nutrients. Why are those three so important?
So these three form the basis of something called our intrinsic motivation. It's a theory called self-determination theory. So it's a research-based term. A good 30, 40 years of research behind the fact showing that when we get a little bit of dose of each of these three pieces, when we get a little bit of dose of some challenge or some flexibility and control in our work, when we feel like we are showing up to a team where we belong, where we matter, where we know that our talents are being utilized, and when we are challenged, when we aren't just, functionally being repetitious about our work, but we're being pushed to achieve things that are indicative of goals that matter to us. When we have that constellation, those three pieces, so much research showing about how it increases organizational commitment. It lowers depression, burnout, anxiety, increases organizational buy-in, increases engagement. Like it's such a foundational need to feel like I'm coming to work because I want to be here and I want to do this great work versus I'm being told to do it or what have you. So that intrinsic motivation starts to blossom when we get these three needs met.
I'm wondering, keeping talking about those, in a hybrid environment or a fully remote environment, is there like tension between the autonomy and the belonging piece, the freedom and the connection? And does that create challenges?
Yes, I've noticed that certainly since the pandemic where everything got upended in terms of, the predominant method of our work happened to be going into an office building and doing work. And when the pandemic hit, obviously dependent on profession, we had to figure out how to work in these alternative environments where people were fully remote or now largely hybrid. But you start to see that creep kind of back into more so in the office. And in a lot of instances, return to office mandates where you're required now and expected to be back in the office, 4 days a week, in some cases now 5 days a week. And so what you see is it's like trying to put toothpaste back in a bottle. Like you just can't do it because it's like, I know I can do this job fully remotely. and I can do it well, and we can have great success and meet our numbers. And now you're telling me I have to give up one of those huge sort of psychological benefits that is really important to me, that I really need in service of coming back into a physical office. And that's frustrating for people when they feel that erosion of autonomy. On the other hand, though, being in and amongst a group of people and in person and, riffing off of each other and having the water cooler conversations and building up that community is really, really important. And so there has been a consistent tension between the A and the B, certainly over, the last 5 or 6 years in a pronounced way.
So one of your favorite things, I think, was, I know offline you were saying that was kind of the number one reason for writing the book was sticky recognition.
Okay.
You really like that. So what does that term mean and what makes it sticky?
Yeah. So that's a term that I came up with. And it's basically just meant to be a way to show a person or your team the evidence of their impact. So I keep coming back to this notion of when I myself as a worker know that I'm making an impact, when we collectively together as a team know that we're making an impact. Again, the benefits that you see from that, just motivationally and psychologically are huge, right? There's, again, lower burnout, lower attrition, higher organizational commitment. All sorts of things happen when I can very keenly see that connection. And as I was researching the sticky recognition piece, I stumbled into, because I kept asking myself, why is this sticking? Like I would talk to people about their stories of, they didn't call it sticky recognition, but they would tell me a story about, a time when they got feedback and that they remembered it 20 years. They remembered it for 20 years, 14 years. I'm like, why? What is making it stick so much? And that led me into the second part of the equation, which was the science of mattering, where we are both achieving things that are important to us, and we are also being recognized for the things that we are doing. And so it's a fundamental human need that we all have. And that sticky recognition piece really turns on or blooms that deeper mattering need or source.
Yeah, I think most of us recognize we want to matter, whether it's in our workplace or whether it's at home. We want to feel like we matter, right? So
yeah, it's I just put this was one of my latest LinkedIn posts, but I had a conversation. I happened to be speaking at a law firm retreat, and you always have interesting conversations with lawyers. And so these, being a partner retreat, this was, senior level people in a law firm. And one of the partners, pulled me aside after the program, and I had been talking about sticky recognition and mattering in part. And he said, I don't think we ever really lose the need to feel like we matter in our world of work. And we had a great conversation about it. And then later at dinner, I was talking to a different partner, and this partner's view is the one that I oftentimes will hear, especially from senior leaders. I don't need to be recognized. Like, I don't need that recognition stuff. So I said, I kind of pushed back a little bit, and I said, but you might not need it in terms of like words. You might not need someone to send you an email, but I bet you really appreciate it when a client tells you you've done a really great job and they're going to send you more work, right? I bet you appreciate the corner office that you're sitting in. I bet you appreciate the comp bump that you got and that lovely bonus that you got as well. So it's like, let's expand how we think about sticky recognition and mattering. No, you don't necessarily need someone to tell you something, but I bet you really want some of those other, kind of visible signs of recognition and mattering.
Yeah, I think if we said, I guess you don't matter, we'll take these away, I think he might change his mind.
Yeah, he paused. He paused for a really long time, and he said, like, you made me think there. Like, there you go. Or it's like, sticky recognition and mattering comes in all forms. And, it's not necessarily the same for everyone. We just want to feel noticed. We want to feel acknowledged. We want to be seen in what we do.
You kind of mentioned this, or you alluded to it at least, that when you give the recognition, have what you call thank you plus. And because you actually mentioned there's a couple of other sentences you could put in that really changes the impact.
It extraordinarily changes the impact. So I always tell people, I joke, I say, if you're not someone who says thank you a lot, start there, because the phrase a little thanks goes a long way really does apply if you don't ever hear it. So start there. But this is a strategy. This is a skill that can take like 2 minutes, a minute and a half. So it's free, not a big, output of time. But I give the example of talking about when I finished my first year of law school. I clerked for a judge and I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. I felt lost with a lot of the stuff that he was assigning to me. And he gave me this project that was really complicated. I did it and I turned it in. And I walked into my office a couple of weeks later and he had a note on my chair and he said, "Thank you so much for your report. The way that you summarized the cases helped me be able to see a really easy way that I could rule. Just wanted to say thanks." That's like literally all it says. And I still have the note in my office. And this was 20 plus years ago. So it's that extra piece. It's like naming the behavior that you saw that led to the good outcome. So that when he said, "The way that you organize those summaries helped me see the takeaways very clearly," that was it. That's the sticky part. That's the part that signaled to me like, wow, you really read this thing that I gave you. And you had to kind of like slow your roll in order to be able to meaningfully convey that back to me. And that's what makes it so extraordinary and so sticky, because we don't hear that hardly at all. So it's not a difficult skill in terms of actually doing it. It's difficult in that we have to, in the unmanageable workload and other chaotic environments that we find ourselves in at work, slow down enough to recognize moments where we could deliver that kind of feedback.
So we've talked about this a couple times now, but there's this roadblock of people saying they're too busy to say thank you or to recognize others, or as I've been known to say, I give you feedback every 2 weeks to say you're doing a good job. It's called a paycheck. Yep. So how do we help leaders see the value in taking that pause that refreshes and basically says thank you plus?
This has been one of the more interesting aspects of this segment in particular when I talk to leaders, because they'll oftentimes be very, very blunt with me. And a lot of them, I think, recognize the importance of it or what have you, but, they love to push back. And, I think for a lot of folks, we're so worried about making the numbers or making sure something doesn't happen or preventing the error or the mistake that we don't take the time to then amplify what's going right. So there's that component of it. There's also, there's not a sense of urgency around this, or not a perceived sense of urgency, right? It's like, oh man, if I don't say thank you this week to someone, I bet they're going to leave. Like we don't think that. And then other leaders have gotten into more of the conversation around, well, this feels like, everybody gets a snowflake, or now we just all have to kind of like sit around and like kumbaya it out or whatever. But I appreciate the frankness. But what I always say back to them, no matter what, is that this isn't about stroking someone's ego. This is about really conveying to people what they're doing well in a succinct way that activates just like this whole cascade of positive psychological fuel that at the end of the day, if we're going to talk dollars and cents, is going to make you more money. So to say nothing of the fact that it's going to be beneficial in other ways from a motivational and a well-being standpoint. So
when we talked about autonomy, is that just where and when people work, or is it bigger than that?
It's bigger than that. And I think that's one of the things that I hope people take away from the book when they read that part in particular, because as soon as I mention that to a lot of leaders, they're like, oh man, there's nothing we can do, right? Because, our work has a policy around, when people can come in, and like now we're 4 days back in the office or whatever it is. And they resort kind of to that narrow framing of control and flexibility. And what I discovered is that if we start to have a broader conversation, leaders then can start to see like, oh, there's other ways that I can help people have a perceived sense of control and flexibility. I can give them more decision-making latitude. When I hand them an assignment or a project or what have you, I can tell them to just run with it and, just CC me on the emails, but this is yours to kind of deal with. I can, if they've earned that sense of autonomy, I can give that to them. I can encourage them to flex their creative muscles, to design something a little bit of a different way, or to, think about a problem perhaps in a little bit of a different way. I can suggest to somebody that, hey, you should really meet, these 3 people in our organizational system, and give you the latitude to then be able to connect with people and form different groups the way that you want to. That's social autonomy. So there's a lot of different entry points that leaders can take when they expand their thinking around what autonomy can really be.
So we were talking about hybrid a minute ago, or fully remote, and I know that one of the lack of community is one of those 6 core drivers of stress and disengagement. So how do we build community if we're just virtual or on, Teams all the time?
Yeah, I think it goes back to taking those one-on-one moments that we were talking about, right? So the sense of like whether you call it having a meaningful conversation, whether you have it, your typical one-on-ones, whether you call it I originally was calling them Seinfeld meetings. So Seinfeld being a really popular show back in the day about nothing, they would joke that it's a show about nothing. Like, so have a meeting about nothing, right? Like, just don't have a work outcome attached to it. And then you can sort of see where the conversation starts to go. And it might feel a little goofy, the first couple or few times, but when people start to, get in the habit of that, then they become used to that. So I think you can certainly do that in a virtual way. I think that you can make time. One of my favorite studies is about firefighters and talking about how when firefighters have their community meals and they eat together, their sense of engagement goes through the roof, their burnout levels go down, and other things happen. So that sense of, joining someone for a virtual coffee or a virtual lunch and still kind of taking that time to just, leave work over here for a second and, connect and have, those meetings is important. And I do think it is, even if someone is, fully remote or hybrid, I think having or building in those moments where you can still get together quarterly for an in-person something at such and such office, or the retreats or things of that nature, I think also become important. It's building in some of that in-person piece too is important.
It's funny. The negative side of my brain when you said the Seinfeld meetings is meetings about nothing. I know there's at least 10 people listening to this go, well, every meeting I go to is a Seinfeld meeting then.
Meeting about nothing. I do not even need to be at those meetings because there's so much about it. I never even thought about it that way. That's probably one of the factors why I don't use that term anymore. But yeah, not how I meant it.
No. I love it. I love it. It's just, I work with a lot of teams. And so I already know there's somebody rolling their eyes go, that's every meeting I go to. Why are we having this? So other research that you mentioned shows that having a best friend at work results in greater customer engagement, being more efficient, a safer workplace environment, and more innovation, but only about 30% of the people have a best friend at work. So again, I don't want to keep beating on this hybrid and remote, but it is a challenge we deal with. So how do you establish friendships in that environment? Does it go back to the one-on-ones again?
Well, I think some of it is the one-on-ones. The one-on-ones are oftentimes between, a leader and a direct report. And so I think sometimes we may feel uncomfortable thinking about establishing a friendship where you've got, the different levels of authority. And so I think it goes back to carving out and creating a sense of our people on my team connecting with each other on a regular basis. And what does that look like? Because if we are a distributed team, especially if we are working across time zones globally, perhaps, what do we have to do? And I think that just the regularity of trying to connect in some of these more informal ways becomes important. I think then it becomes even more important to have some of these quarterly in-person get-togethers, and we're going to rotate around, where we're going to meet. We're early 2026. I spoke at a company retreat last fall, and it was the first time that they had seen each other in person in 2.5 or 3 years. So, we're comfortably, hopefully not going to beyond the pandemic or, certainly the effects of it. And I'm still seeing a lot of folks who have not interacted or met each other in person. And so it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I think that you hit on something there. I think the people that have worked together for 5 years before the pandemic were able to transition. The ones that I was always more worried about were the new grads who their first job was totally hybrid and they had never met these people. And, when you talk about culture is a big word. To me, culture is what I see when nobody's around and the person hangs the phone up and then says something derogatory about the client. That, to me, not a good culture, but that's culture. And it's hard to see that when you're virtual. So it's curious. I was always worried about people who came on during the hybrid or virtual and never had met people and didn't really have a mentor, didn't really know how the culture worked. I think it's another challenge.
And you're not exposed as much to the decision makers, the people who can put a name with a face and say, maybe they might remember you 3 months down the road, because that proximity bias is real, right? If I saw Paula walking down the hallway 3 months ago and we had an informal little chit chat and she said how much she'd love to be able to work on one of my projects one day, and I'm thinking about that 3 or 4 or 5 months from now, and I remember her and I remember that conversation because we bumped into each other and had a little informal chit chat. I mean, that's a real thing. And so that proximity, understanding that proximity bias exists, and making sure that you as a leader are being very conscious of making sure that people who are hybrid or more remote are being staffed on visible projects and are being, included on meetings and other things is critical.
What we found interesting in our 40 plus years of doing project work is we do a lot of really big global projects, and we have this rule that when we do a project, you must come together face to face for a week. And over that week, we'll plan the project. And the subtle thing that's really happening is, as I said earlier, I'm changing you from an email address to which I feel no connection into somebody who has kids like I have kids, and your kids play this and my kids play that. And so now I'm building accountability to the other people on my team. And we found that we could do 2-year projects remotely as long as we have that first meeting face to face. If we make the investment to spend a week together doing the plan, then people will hold themselves accountable to deliver on their task for the next 2-3 years.
And I think, so first of all, I love that. And I think sometimes companies, what they see is like, oh my gosh, we have to fly people in from like all over, and they see the expense piece, which I get, and that's real. But what you also have to look at is, what are you getting for the money that you're spending with people coming together, and that trust. So the accountability, the trust, the cohesion, the potential increase in psychological safety, because I now feel more safe to speak up and within the group because I now feel like I know you a little bit better, is immeasurable, and is far beyond the dollars and cents amount that you spend up front. So I get that can feel really hard, in the moment, but I love that you all did that, and that's a great idea.
Yeah, we make it work because we tell them the ROI on the back end, as you just alluded to, is much greater than the cost of the flights.
Yep.
So we talked a little bit about ABC. Let's talk about ACR now. Active, constructive, responding, which again, I love these terms. So what is it and how does it help boost belonging?
Well, of all the skills, so I actually learned, this is one of the skills that I was taught as part of my resilience sort of segment in programming back at the University of Pennsylvania. So I have been teaching this concept now for 17 years, and it is probably, of all the skills that I teach, probably my favorite skill of all, in part because I have seen such an astronomical benefit in my own relationships because of this. And it's of all the things that I teach, people come up to me afterwards saying, oh, I'm passive constructive or I'm passive destructive. And people really start to like identify with these different categories, but they sabotage relationships all over the place. And I think one time, just when you hear what this is, and how it's a very counterintuitive way of building relationships. And it's through shared good news. It's through shared wins. It's through shared success. So it's sort of that positive side of the equation that we oftentimes don't pay attention to. And that just generally as human beings, we're not very good at. We are hardwired and programmed to notice and seek out and remember negative information is how humans are wired. It's kept us alive for all of these years. So when people, pepper in these little moments of like, oh, my golf handicap improved, or, oh, it's my birthday next week, we're not like hearing them in the same way. They don't command our attention. But this is the research of Dr. Shelley Gable and her team. And what she's found is that when we capitalize, when we respond in the right way, when somebody has these moments of shared wins and success, it does astronomically positive things for our relationships and for team cohesion and what have you. And so, and it doesn't mean it's just like the thank you plus. You don't have to have a long conversation, because I think sometimes, again, when I ask people, what are the roadblocks for you being able to do this well? I'm too busy and I don't have time and da. But her research really shows it's like 45 seconds to a minute. It comes down to basically asking one more question than you otherwise would. So if I'm excited and I'm like, hey, Clint, my birthday's, next week and I'm super excited. one of the quadrants is called passive constructive. So you might say, oh, that's great, Paula. Cool. Right. And we oftentimes think that that's enough. That little like, woo, I heard you, woo, the little rah-rah is enough to really cement the quality and build the quality of the relationship. And it's not, because when I'm excited that it's my birthday, when we're excited about anything, whether it's a big thing or a little thing, I want to tell you about it, right? I want to wallow in it a little bit. And if you're not asking me questions or like giving me the opportunity to do that, it's sort of frustrating and it kind of falls flat. So that's one style. Another style is where we call it conversation hijacker or response shifter. So if you're like, hey, it's my birthday. And I'm like, oh, cool. My birthday's next month. And I'm planning this big trip and I'm going to Hawaii and I'm doing all this fantastic. I've like taken the conversation and hijacked it and made it about myself. And you're just kind of left there going, oh, well, thanks. It was my birthday, but all right. The next style
there's a commercial, not to interrupt your flow. There's a commercial that I saw recently where a lady's talking about her birthday and it's at a work event and there's a big cake and people keep going by taking the cake and then somebody picks the last piece as they walk away and she goes, well, it's my birthday. And she's looking around and nobody's thanking her. They're just taking the cake.
Just taking the cake. Oh, that's horrible. Right. And you feel your joy just whittling away bit by bit. The third category that Dr. Gable and her team identified is what we call the joy thief, active destructive responding. So you might be all excited and you're like, hey, it's your birthday. It's my birthday coming up. And if I hear that, I might say, oh, well, that's amazing. But, oh man, you're getting up there in years, right? How you feeling, now that you're insert age here, kind of thing. And so it's sort of like you squash somebody's joy, oftentimes in an unintentional way. But the last style that she talks about is active constructive responding. That's ACR. And that is the only style that really builds the health and quality of your relationships, both at work and outside of work. And so that's where, you acknowledge the birthday. Oh, that's amazing. How are you going to celebrate? You look fantastic for your age, however is authentic for you to kind of carry out that conversation. And again, it can be a couple or a few minutes, but when we are responded to in an active and constructive way, it increases psychological safety. It increases our self-efficacy. We feel like we can navigate challenges better. It increases our resilience. Again, a lot of wonderful things come from it. And so it's always interesting when I see people practice this, because if you don't do it a lot, we oftentimes end up in that passive constructive faux listener first box where it's like, yay, good job. Awesome. Like we have those kind of like, we're just not trained. We haven't trained our brain to actually go beyond those like initial platitudes. And, but I love having people practice this in workshops because the energy in the room just goes through the roof and you take your phone out and you're showing the pictures of the grandkids or whatever it is that you're getting into. And we just don't pay attention to that enough, both at work and outside of work.
And I would throw a caveat on that. It's even better if when you ask these questions, you're looking them in the eye, not looking down at your phone or looking at your computer, looking away or whatever.
Yeah. And I think that then even if you're trying to be active and constructive in your responding, I think that you can lop into that, passive constructive faux listener, even if you're asking questions, if it seems like I don't care and they're just, performative and I've got to finish this email anyway, that probably doesn't meet the level of ACR.
So I don't want to leave this conversation without finishing talking at least about resilience. And you define resilience as a capacity for stress-related growth. And I think that's a really great definition. What does it look like for a team to bounce forward after a setback?
Yeah. So I include a nice little chart in the book because I think it's a good thing when we're thinking of, so there's different levels of resilience. There's different intersections with resilience. There's individual resilience, which I think we oftentimes hear the most about. There's team resilience, and then there's organizational resilience. And the way that they're built is different in each way. And when it comes to team resilience, I think there's also so much that teams can do on the front end. So maybe we just went through a significant challenge. How are we going to prevent this going forward? How are we potentially going to slow down something similar to this from happening again? And it gets back to a lot of like really effective teaming practices, right? Do we have a strong sense of psychological safety? Do we know each other's capacity? Are we talking about the wins and successes frequently enough? Because that's fortifying for our team and that's bringing us together. Do we have that sense of trust established? Do we have the right internal and external partnerships cultivated that are going to help us continue to withstand, the complexities and the challenges and the adversities and what have you? So there's lots of different things that teams can do before the challenge, during the challenge, and after the challenge, keeping those open lines of communication. Making sure you follow up with people, as whatever the challenges is happening, during it, to make sure that their capacity is still okay. What are the backup systems? There's all sorts of different entry points and ways for teams to start to kind of build and flex those resilience muscles. I'm looking at my desk because there's a paper here somewhere. It's a brand new paper in the annual review of psychological and organizational behavior around team empowerment and team resilience. So I'm gonna read up on the latest and greatest there, but it's a really powerful, I think it's one of the more necessary skill sets for people and teams and organizations to develop, given the way the world of work is expanding.
So one of the things I love when I read books like yours is there'll always be this hidden nugget that I did not see on my bingo card when I picked the book up. And for this one, it was, you tell a story about the predictive ability of heart rates on decision making.
Yes, that was one of the things that stuck with me as well when I was researching it, that I stumbled on that little bit. And I can just picture like it's a really cool concept. And I wonder like, how do we actually like do this practically in the workplace? Because I don't think we're all going to attach to heart rate monitors. But the study found that teams whose heart rate synchrony, I always say that word incorrectly, but when our heart rates start to get on a rhythm that kind of matches each other's, they found that teams where that happened had higher levels of trust, better decision-making, and other really strong positive team outcomes, which I thought was really, really cool. So like biologically wired, we're cohesive down to like the heart rate level in terms of how our team functions.
Was there any correlation or causation? I mean, why would somebody, is it because some people are angry and so their heart rate is high and other people's are more calm, and so if everybody's at the same level, it's better? Or was there anything about that?
No, I think it was just a signal, kind of indicating level of comfort, right? I think it was, to me, when I read it, it was really just sort of a signifier of psychological safety. Like we can say the hard things to each other, like we can say the good stuff to each other. We are able to, share partially formed ideas with each other, where we can just kind of hash out and noodle through and no one's going to get mad or say we're stupid or whatever. I think it's just an indicator that we're just so extraordinarily comfortable with each other that when we're kind of all just kind of traveling in that same sort of trustful way, the outcomes are great. I would love to see how this functionally would happen. I can just picture like a group of like physicians or lawyers like sitting in a room and all have heart rate monitors on them, trying to make them all match.
Competition.
Yeah. Right. Totally.
So there's so much more we could cover, but I'm running out of time. So let me just tell people they should get the book. You should read it, because we didn't talk about the 4-4-4 way to end a week. We didn't talk about the 3-3-3 time method or the 20% rule. So much. I'm an engineer, so I love numbers. So much more to cover there. So let me end with the 3 questions that I ask everybody who come on. First one, are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
For me, writing this book has changed my approach to talking to my own team in terms of heightening that sticky recognition and mattering. So to me, that becomes like the core or the source for everything else going forward.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
My dad, because I was going through a time, it's not about 4 or 5 years ago, where I was trying to figure out whether I should scale my business, continue to grow it, I brought on a director of, revenue growth, I can't even remember what the title was. And we were having a really tough go of it. And so I called my dad and I'm like, what do I do? And he just said, keep your business you for as long as possible. So I've kept that in the back of my mind.
Yeah, it's hard to argue when you're a team of one.
Yeah. Right.
What is the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
So I know this is a future guest of yours, and one of my favorite books was The Power of Mattering by Zach Mercurio. And I think his framework about just making sure that you pay attention to the fact that people need to be seen, they need to be noticed, and they need to be affirmed on a regular basis really brought me back to, I think, certainly my daughter is almost 10. But really slowing myself down on a day-to-day basis to make sure that I'm just noticing what she's doing, that I'm affirming her behaviors, all of the positive, good stuff that she's doing in particular, instead of like the no's and the negative, I think was really eye-opening. And then I have always loved Dr. Kelly McGonigal's book, The Upside of Stress. Because for as much as I talk about burnout and all of the downside consequences of burnout, there can be an important upside to stress, and the way that she talks about the research is just really, really lovely. So if anyone's interested in that, she also has a really great TED Talk. So Dr. Kelly McGonigal, The Upside of Stress.
I'll have to look into that one too. So this has really been great. I appreciate your time today. If people want to learn more about you or engage your services, how can they do that?
Sure. My website is the hub of all of that. And so it's www.stressandresilience.com. So find lots of downloadable resources and other materials and information about, workshops and consulting and all of that. And then LinkedIn is also my social media platform of choice. So just Paula Davis, hop over to Paula Davis and find me on LinkedIn as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Paula. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Clint.